Good afternoon or good morning, students. I'm honored and privileged to bring another special guest to our class. I'm honored to bring Dr. Rebecca White. She is the professor and director of the John P. Lowth Entrepreneurship Center at the University of Tampa, podcaster, interviewer of well-known entrepreneurs, and the current author of the book, See, Do, Repeat, which I've got dovetailed all over the place. Well, Dr. White, thanks for being here. I very much appreciate this.
Hey, Scott, it's great to be here, and I'm honored that you've given me a chance to talk to you and your students today.
Well, awesome. Well, right before the call started, I asked you to share a little bit about your mother and her entrepreneurship journey, because part of what we're doing in the class, and one of the goals of the class, is to make sure the students receive mentorship and find mentors. And it's always nice when your mentor is your parents. So I'd love for you to maybe share maybe a bit about yourself, and then maybe share the story of your mother and her journey.
Sure. And I was blessed to have an entrepreneurial mother. And the really, one of the cool things about this journey for me of writing this book is it really brought me back to my roots. And after spending many years as an entrepreneur myself and as an entrepreneurship educator, I found that a lot of the lessons that really mattered for my students, and a lot of what was important to be successful as an entrepreneur, was what my mom taught me. So my mom was, I grew up in a small town in West Virginia, and my mom was a pioneer. She was really ahead of her time. And at the time, she, as many entrepreneurs are, she was often thought of as being a bit eccentric or a bit different. And, I found that from a lot of my students and a lot of entrepreneurs that I've interviewed over the years. I've found that we oftentimes feel like we don't quite fit in the classroom or even in society sometimes. But my mom was, she was a business owner. She had her own business. But what was more important about my mom, I think, was that she was curious and interested in everything. So she was always learning, and she was always willing to take a risk and to try something new. And that was probably one of the most important things I learned from her. She had a lot of sayings. And one of the ones I heard a lot was, if you've never made a mistake, if you've never failed, you haven't done anything. So I really learned that the biggest failure in life was really not trying, as opposed to trying, doing my best, and finding out that the outcome wasn't what I wanted. So having that kind of a mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset, is really what has driven me through my entire career. And I was fortunate enough to be co-founder of a company, a risk mitigation company for higher education, back before Web 2.0. So basically, we created a software to allow campuses to report questionable behavior to a centralized location. It's a pretty simple thing now, but at the time we were doing it, we didn't have the technology that we have now. But we started that in about 2004, I think it was. And that was a few years before my alma mater, Virginia Tech, actually had a horrific accident or experience where 32 souls were taken by a disgruntled student. So that business was a great learning experience for me. I'm also educated, have my PhD, and have spent many years teaching entrepreneurship and building entrepreneurship programs. And one of the things that interested me the most was trying to dig into what is it that really differentiates successful entrepreneurs. And we talk a lot about mindset, but what I realized was it's about what we do with that mindset. So I added the behavioral side to what I wrote about. And that's why the book is called The Practice of Entrepreneurship. It's about taking action.
I appreciate that. And, and thanks for that background. And I love the concept, as you go through the book, every chapter has an applicational portion of it, which I think is a really good place, because you can read all kinds of books on entrepreneurship and hear all kinds of stories, but you've got to, it's having great ideas is wonderful, but being able to execute on them is the important thing. So one of the things that our students are doing in the class, they're doing some personal branding and some personal networking, but they're also creating their own business idea and trying to find that opportunity to create a business that solves a real problem and has a real solution. So you talk about discovering opportunities. Tell us a little bit about how entrepreneurs can discover and then more importantly, take advantage of opportunities.
That's a great question. As you know, after reading the book, that's one of the three competencies that I identified: the ability to recognize and act on opportunities. And one of the things I love about teaching this whole space of opportunity recognition is that students tend to come in with kind of two mindsets. One being, I see opportunity everywhere, so I'm all over it. I know how to do this. And then the other side being, I am never able to recognize opportunities. I'm not good at it. This is something I can't do. So it's really a lot of fun because I think both sides can be educated when we start talking about opportunity recognition and what that really is. Mm-hmm. And so it really starts with understanding what an opportunity is. Like anything else, before we can recognize it, we have to know what an opportunity is. And there are really 4 criteria for understanding an opportunity. And the first is that it has to be something of value to the customer. So, one of the things that many of us teach now is getting out of the classroom or getting out of the office or getting out of the building and actually talking to customers. Of course, it can be done online as well, but the real focus is, are we creating something of value? It also has to be something that's of interest to the entrepreneur. So, is it something that the entrepreneur is willing to put their time and energy and effort into? It also has to be something that's financially viable for all the interested parties. Otherwise, it's going to be tough to continue to pursue that when the going gets tough. And the fourth thing is, it's something that has to be timely. And when I talk about the whole timing piece, I love to talk about where the word opportunity comes from. And opportunity is really, it comes from the Latin phrase ob portu, which is really the time when the captain and crew were waiting at the port for the tide to rise. This was before we had dredged ports, and they could only go into port when the tide rose. And so ob portu really means, in Latin, it means toward port. And so the captain and the crew had to be waiting and watching and ready for the tide to rise and the wind conditions to be positive so that they could go to port. The moral of that story, when you're thinking about opportunities, is that there is a timing element. And we've seen lots of examples of ideas that have not been opportunities because the timing was wrong. Mm-hmm. So the first thing in understanding how to recognize opportunities is really to know what they are. And so anytime it starts with an idea, but an idea is not an opportunity. So you have to measure it against those 4 criteria. Right. And there's lots of different ways, which I talk about a lot in my book, to enhance your individual ability to identify and to evaluate opportunities. And so those are all skills that can be learned. There's definitely, although we look at some people and we say they always are coming up with the best opportunities, the reality is they're still practicing the steps in that process. So it's a process that can be learned, but it starts with understanding how to define an opportunity and how to recognize it when you see it.
And I was reading the book. You asked them to put together a bug list, which I thought was a really interesting concept, because I'm trying to tell the students, look, find something you're passionate about because you want to learn about it and you're going to be proactive in that. But the whole problem of the whole aspect of solving a problem is finding out what doesn't work in what you're using now. So maybe share a little bit about this bug list and the concept and how students can put that together.
Yeah, that kind of comes from the idea that, as you pointed out, opportunities are really just the other side of problems.
Right.
And I've had a lot of students over the years who come to me with all kinds of quote unquote opportunities, ideas that they're going to pursue. And when we dig into them, what we realize is that there's a market of one or two that really care about it.
Right.
And so the reality is, it's important to think about opportunities in terms of being problems to solve. And that will allow, what I think is so powerful about that is if you're always staying focused on the problem, it will allow you to pivot when you need to. So a lot of entrepreneurs come up with an idea. It's often a very superficial and shallow solution to a problem. And then they continue to work at trying to prove that that particular solution will work. And even when they're confronted with evidence that it won't, they have a hard time changing because they've fallen in love with their solution.
Right.
So if instead you stay focused on there being a problem that you're going to solve, then the solution doesn't become your primary focus, the problem does. So when you're struggling with finding an opportunity, an ideal way to sort of jumpstart that, an exercise, if you will, to really, help get your mind moving and thinking about different ways that you might create a business, is to make this bug list. And I've done it a number of different ways with my students, but the most effective way is really to kind of force yourself to write down as many things as you can that bug you. Maybe take a 24-hour period and just write down all the things that bug you. And even if you're somebody who's a relatively happy person and don't get too frustrated, you're going to probably be able to find some things. And so it's just a mental exercise that can really help you get started coming up with ideas. And I've actually seen it turn into great businesses. We had a young man once that had been in the military. He was in Okinawa when he was coming out. He wanted to go to college, but he wasn't sure which universities would be most appropriate for someone coming out right out of the military. Mm-hmm. So he went online because, as I said, he was in Okinawa and he was, had to do everything remotely. And he started looking for military-friendly colleges. And what he found was that there were a lot of for-profit, not accredited schools that were advertising, but there wasn't a good source for military, former military to find a university that would be a good fit. Mm-hmm. So when he did his bug list, he actually wrote that down because that was one of the things that bugged him, and he turned it into a business called collegeveterans.com, and then later into several other businesses after that, all focused on this idea of military and helping veterans find the right university.
That's great. I love the concept of just, writing it down, all the things that bug you, and more than likely the opportunity is probably going to be on that list. So
yes.
So obviously you and I both teach, academically, and you had some really good insight on some other, the framework of the type of education and training you should have to be an entrepreneur, but maybe share a bit for the students, because I want them to get out there. And because the practice of entrepreneurship is about learning from many sources. So maybe you could share some sources that you've come across or are involved in outside of the classroom that new entrepreneurs like your students and my students can utilize.
Absolutely. And I'll just tell a personal story on that note, because, and I already mentioned this earlier, but a lot of times when I talk about my own preparation to be an educator, I tell people that my own experiences as an entrepreneur, both the good and bad experiences, let's say both the successful and unsuccessful, have been some of my best learning opportunities. So I'm a big believer in experiences. There are, one of the things I talk about in my book are mastery experiences. Mm-hmm. And mastery experiences can be, they can include a lot of different things. You know, a lot of our students loved pitch competitions. I don't know about yours, but pitch competitions are a lot of fun and they're a great start. But I've also seen a lot of students kind of get caught up in that, and they can pitch and they love pitching and they like winning money. But when it goes to taking something a step beyond that, they really struggle. Right. So I think as an entrepreneur, one of the great ways to learn about entrepreneurship is to give it a try. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there are a lot of university programs that are co-curricular. In other words, they're not in the classroom. We have an accelerator program, for example, for our students. Many universities have that, but also a lot of communities have startup weekends. They have accelerator programs, incubator programs. There are a lot of communities now that are offering launch factories, mm-hmm. where, you know, you can come in and they'll actually give you an idea, and you get the opportunity to, you know, work on building a company with that. And there's often money associated with it. So a lot of great learning experiences just by getting out there. You know, entrepreneurs, I believe, entrepreneurs need both formal and informal education. Absolutely. So, you know, if I had any advice for a student of entrepreneurship right now, it would be, don't limit yourself to what your professor and your classes are providing you. Be proactive and step out and find some of your own mastery experiences. Find role models and interview them. Take them out to lunch. Absolutely. Ask them what worked and didn't work. You know, you mentioned earlier, I have a podcast. I think podcasts are an excellent way to learn. Absolutely. I would highly recommend, I'd love for you to listen to mine. Mine's called The In Factor. That's ENFACTOR. And I'd love for you to listen to mine, but there are many others, How I Built This, and a lot of entrepreneurship themed, but that's a great way to be inspired and to learn. So, you know, get out there, practice it, give it a try, listen to podcasts. Don't limit yourself to what's going on in the classroom. I
appreciate that.
Yeah. And try something new too, because I think that's the other thing. Learning something different so that you add another element to what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of leads to the next question, because the class is networking for entrepreneurs. And so the students have spent the semester doing really two things. One, building their personal brand and their business brand via social media, LinkedIn, and primarily, and then going out and going to physical events and doing their 30-second pitch to at various networking and business events throughout the semester. So, and I believe that networking is highly important. That's why I teach this class, because I can tell you I'm a big believer that knowing something is not as important as knowing someone who knows something. And but share you mentioned networking. Share your thoughts on networking and the value for entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. And again, as you know from reading my book, I devoted an entire chapter to networking. The see, do, repeat, the do piece is really about that whole space around taking action. And one of the things I always tell my students is that their business is going to be a combination of who they are, what they know, and who they know. Right. So just like you said, it's really critical that you surround yourself with the right people. And I've always found that it's of great value to surround myself with really smart, talented people who know a lot of things that I don't know, or know how to do things that I don't know how to do. So, not always trying to seek out people that are just like me. But as you pointed out, I interview and tell a lot of stories in my book about entrepreneurs and what they've accomplished. And a lot of them talk about their networks and how they build their networks. So, there are the very obvious ways to build networks, and that is, go to networking events for entrepreneurs and meet people, in your, in your classes and at your university. But the interesting thing is that there are opportunities to meet people everywhere. And the entrepreneurs that I've worked with over the years, thousands of them that I've talked to about networking, have thought about networking as an everyday, all the time kind of activity. And in other words, you never know where you're going to meet someone that can be play an important role in what you're trying to accomplish. It might be, something obvious like sitting next to them on the airplane, but it also might be standing in line, waiting somewhere, and just having a conversation with people. So, networking can happen anywhere. I do think we have to be strategic about it, and we have to think about what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
And I also always encourage my students to keep in mind that networking is relationship building. So it's not all about taking, and it's not all about talking. In fact, it's more about listening and learning, and reciprocating and giving back. And practicing those, I think, can be really helpful in the networking aspect of building of entrepreneurship.
I love when you mentioned serendipity in the book. And, I tell students, like, serendipity doesn't happen if you're sitting in front of your phone or sitting in front of your computer.
Right.
And obviously, you can combine networking, and those serendipitous events can happen because you have more people to be have those opportunities to be serendipitous. So
that's so true. And, one of the things I say in there, I don't know if you remember, but I do tell people that it's important sometimes we have to disconnect to connect.
Right.
And I think that's another way to think about it. Yes.
Absolutely. But the final part of our semester is actually just coming up. It's going to be talking about pivoting. So what happens when things don't go as planned? What happens if your business idea isn't the most exciting idea out there? And you mentioned, towards the end of the book, you talk about resilience and optimism. And I've been harping on the students that, look, this may be your first idea, but it may not be your best idea, and it may not even be a good idea. So I'd love for you to share, how entrepreneurs need to be resilient, and obviously you have to have a proper mental set and to be optimistic.
Well, it all goes back to, and I love this conversation because it was really this idea of resilience and optimism that kind of drove my thinking around this book. That's the repeat of the See, Do, Repeat title. That's, as you know, the repeat section of the book. And my experience has been, and the experience of like I said, thousands of entrepreneurs that I've talked to, has been that their initial idea, even in a successful business, is typically not what that business ends up looking like. Mm-hmm. So pivoting and changing and adapting and remaining resilient is going to be part of the journey. And I think it's important for us as educators to let students know that. Anytime I'm coaching an entrepreneur, or anytime I'm talking with a student, I try to share with them this, as many stories as I can of the importance of resilience and optimism. Optimism is important because it allows us to have a expectation that the future is going to be okay and it's going to be positive. I'm not talking about being overly optimistic and, stupid in terms of the way we think about things. And there's plenty of research that has shown that being overly optimistic, especially about finances, could be pretty dangerous. But a belief that the future is going to be okay is really important. Mm-hmm. And resilience is all about reframing the way that we think about things. Resilience, the cool thing about resilience is not just about surviving. Resilience is about coming back better. Mm-hmm. So absolutely. What that means is that what we have to begin to do is reframe how we think about these failures, these losses, these experiences that aren't the outcomes that we expected. Mm-hmm. And reframing them is sort of the first step. Once we've done that, it's also important to share that oftentimes with role models, coaches, trusted people. And then, you know, a tried and true way of dealing with these kinds of failures, or when things don't turn out the way we want, is to have a plan B or mm-hmm. plan C.
Right.
Or D or E. And, you know, there's some great quotes in my book from some of the people that I interviewed, but one of my favorite ones was from Benson Reisman, who was the founder of Green Dot. And Green Dot, very successful company, mm-hmm. first prepaid debit card, went public, I think, in about 8 years ago or so. But he said the one thing he learned is no matter how long he thought it would take, it took twice as long. No matter how much money he thought it would cost, it cost twice as much. Yep. And no matter what he thought it was going to be in the beginning, it was something different. And he said, but the point is to keep going and yep. to execute past failure. So that's what entrepreneurs have to think about. They have to think about having some reserves, some personal reserves in terms of their own strength of character, as well as, if possible, some financial reserves to carry them through. So, you know, that's why sometimes too much money too soon can be really dangerous for an entrepreneur. And so the point is, keep some things in reserve, your personal strength, as well as resources, so that you have people and hopefully some money and your own personal strength to fall back on when those inevitably tough times come knocking at the door.
Absolutely. You end the book with choosing yourself, which I thought was a great way to end it, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, being an entrepreneur could be you could be by yourself at some time. And tell us about that, you know, the concept and how you closed out with choosing yourself, and how new entrepreneurs like the students in our classes can use that concept of choosing yourself.
Thank you. I was as I was writing the book, you know, as an educator, I always think about it's important to have closure. And you probably think about that too, as you end each class. And so as I was ending the book, you know, it was interesting because I had interviewed a young man by the name of Jeff Savilico. And Jeff is a Las Vegas performer entrepreneur. And as we talked, one of the things he said was that back in the day, if you wanted to be a performer, you had to wait for an agent, a talent agent, or someone else to choose you. Right. But he decided not to do that because he didn't come from a traditional expected, you know, performance background. He went to Georgetown University. His parents expected him to be a lawyer or something similar to that, but he ended up loving entertaining. He was a juggler, you know, and so as I was thinking about how I wanted to wrap up this book, I realized that, as you pointed out, entrepreneurship can be a lonely journey at times. And there are times when no one else believes in you, but you still have to believe in yourself. And to take the entrepreneurial journey, for many people around you, it can look to them like you're taking a selfish journey. Right. But at the end of the day, if this is your passion, as you talked about passion earlier, if this is your passion and this is what you're meant to do, you have to choose yourself. And you have to remember that the journey is going to be challenging. And if you're not choosing yourself, being true to who you really are, being authentic, it's going to be really, really tough, because it's going to be painful at times, no matter what. Yep. But if you're being authentic, you have that to always fall back on.
That's awesome.
And I can tell you, when I autograph books for students, sometimes I write choose yourself, and oftentimes I will get tears from students, when they read that, because they say, I haven't done that. I mean, not just students, from people in general. And it can be a very emotional thing.
Right. Any final thoughts, recommendations, or inspirations you have for my students and obviously even your students?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you again for letting me do this. I love talking about it, but I think one of the most important things to remember is that entrepreneurship is a journey and it is a practice. It doesn't have to be perfected. And that's my goal with this book, to remind people that it's a learning process. See, do, repeat is really how we learn everything. I talk about it in my book because, when all of us first learned to walk, we saw people walking, those big people around us, we tried it, and then we kept doing it until we figured it out.
Right.
And that's what entrepreneurship's about. And that makes it accessible to anybody.
Right.
So, entrepreneurship is available to anybody that wants it. It can be transformative and life-changing. It will change your life. And, some of the entrepreneurial ventures that you pursue will bring you positive outcomes. Others might not bring you what you anticipated, but there's always an opportunity to learn. And there's always an opportunity to use what you learn to do it differently next time. And that, to me, is the entrepreneurial mindset that thankfully I learned from my mom. And then after 30 years of research, figured out she had the secret all along.
Well, Dr. White, thank you so much for the time. My students will be seeing this book very soon, and I'll definitely encourage them to log into your podcast. And I give all our speakers a warning that they more than likely will be getting a multitude of connection requests on LinkedIn from my students. But Dr. White, thanks for your time, and I wish you the very best and a great holiday season.
Thank you, Scott. And I would love to connect with them. And I'll just do a little pitch, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I published about a month ago at the Collegiate Entrepreneurs Organization. I launched a second book, and it's actually a guidebook. So it's got all kinds of exercises in it. And it's also based on this book. So it's a companion workbook, if you will, that goes with it. And they're both available at cdorepeat.com or on Amazon or any Barnes and Noble and all the other outlets. So awesome. I had to do my little entrepreneurial pitch.
Everything starts with the sale. Thank you for having
me. It was a treat, and I look forward to connecting with everybody on LinkedIn. It would be fun.
Awesome. Thanks again, Dr. White. Very much appreciate it.